All right, thank you very much. So when we first started putting together this class, the group of us who've been teaching it, we put together this is how we're going to do it, and we had this holdover lesson of we're all going to each do 3. So it started out Austin did 3, I do 3. Dan supposed to start next week, and then Jake was to finish us off. We had one more lesson. We couldn't figure out what we were going to do. And because I am incredibly slow, I've gotten us behind. And so I'm just going to keep going for one more week. And now I'm doing 4 lessons. So I'm sure Dan is perfectly all right with that, getting an extra week to prepare. I'm sure you were ready to go, man. He's upset that I'm still up here is probably the issue. I appreciate, so that's going to be the schedule here. Is I'm going to do one more week and then Dan will resume. I really appreciate all the discussion that we've had the last 2 weeks. I was hoping to get a little bit out of that, and then last week it kept going, and we had some pretty personal things that were shared yesterday or last Wednesday, and I was just really encouraged by that. I'm always, again, I said it last week, and I'll say it again, when we have these big groups, big auditorium classes, there's always engagement. There's always people that want to engage, but sometimes it doesn't get personal, and you want to try to maybe get something out of it, and I've just been really pleased with all the comments that you guys have made. Like I said, some of the pretty personal stuff that has been shared that I think has been really beneficial for me and hopefully edifying for the rest of the group. And I'm hoping to continue to do that. So we're going to pick up where we were last week. So if you have your Bibles, we're still in 1 Peter chapter 3, and we're going to go through the rest of it. So it'll be verses 8 through 22. So I know I went over 8 and 9 a little bit last week, but I'm going to start from there. We talked the last 2 weeks about having about living in a godly way, being humble, having to submit either to your job or to the government or our spouses in our relationships. And it is interesting that we go from talking about submission and being humble to immediately Peter begins to discuss suffering. And it's not like a smooth transition either. It's just immediate. We are suffering, or we are submitting to one another, and now we are suffering together. And a lot of this obviously stems with what we've talked about, how we're talking about how Jesus suffered for us, how he had to give up a lot of things, right? And how his example, we have to reflect that in our lives in some way. And Peter is doing this thing where he's taking application in everyday life and showing us that Jesus set an example, and that is why we should live our life this way. There's a lot of self-help books out there. There's a lot of great testimonial things that people that people read and go through. But when we have examples that Jesus has laid out for us in the way that he lived his life, and we can use that as an application, it's always rewarding for me. So to go back, verses 8 and 9, we've talked about submitting. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Be respectful to your wives. It says, to sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, loving, compassionate, and humble. not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called for the very purpose that you would inherit a blessing. So he gives us some characteristics to try and live by. First is unification, right? To be harmonious with one another. To be compassionate. To care about the suffering of one another. To be compassionate and humble. It also is brotherly love. Don't become hardened by suffering, right? Do not return evil for evil. Tenderheartedness and humility. All sort of summed up in this one sentence, really, that he's written here. It is difficult sometimes to not return evil for evil, I think. We think about that like evil as in the bad guy, right? You know, it's a big discussion in my house with the little kids, the difference between a bad guy and a good guy. But everybody knows that in life there's nuance, and sometimes it's really difficult for us to separate in this day of social media where everybody has an opinion. But when someone does something wrong to you, is it easy to just forgive them or maybe move on? Or is it easier to get back at them or to think poor thoughts towards them even if you're not doing something necessarily in retaliation? So he says all this right after submitting to authority figures or people in your life. To be harmonious and sympathetic. And it says, for you were called for the very purpose that you would inherit a blessing. What is it? What does that mean? What blessing do we inherit if we do all of those things? Yeah, favor from the Lord. Yeah. I think at the very end of class, there was a point that was brought up that I thought was really good about how marriage is difficult, and it can be sometimes we don't see the reward, right? Or relationships can be difficult, but we don't see the reward at the time. And I think that was a powerful statement, because the reward is that we do what's right by Christ. And that, a lot of times, is very difficult to accept, because just like when you're a child, like right now, Penny is potty training, and when she uses the potty, she wants a treat, right? Dad, I pottied. And if I don't get that M&M out quick, it's like, I need 5 of them now, Dad, you forgot. Or in work, right? We talked about the government, work, whatever. We're submitting to the government. We pay our taxes. And if we do that, we keep our house. We keep in good standing, right? We go to work. We submit to our boss. We do things. And if we do that, we might win a reward or a bonus or additional pay or something like that. When we submit or we love and care for our spouses, the reward is they're happy, right? Happy wife, happy life. But sometimes the reward, the blessing, is kind of invisible. And it's difficult to accept that. I have done right by God. I'm doing what Christ wants me to do. But nothing has happened to me. My life is still hard, the saying, bad things happen to good people, right? But the blessing is that you're doing it. Because this life, it's like Solomon says, it's a vapor. Yeah, that does happen. Has anybody ever been in a point in your life where you feel like you're doing the right thing, but you're just stuck in the mud, or you just continue to stuff, or maybe things can, like, there's something that's bad that's happened to you? I know one time in my life, and I don't mean to say like any of this stuff really to like make myself sound good or whatever, but there was a time in my life that I had to make a choice, and it was, do I have the friends that I have that are taking me over here, or do I have no one to turn to and continue to go to church and get rid of these bad examples in my life? And there was a time in my life that I had pretty much like no one to turn to. It was a very short period of time, but it was very difficult because I felt like I was making the right choices. I felt like these were the decisions I had to make, but yet because I made these decisions, I had no friends. None. And thank goodness for some of the men that are actually in this room today, right, saved me from that. And I will forever be grateful. But I do think a little bit of that is because I continued on a path and they saw that. And like you said, your life can seem a little bit worse, but you continue that suffering, things do tend to get better, right? People here, the ones that want you to get to heaven, recognize that. That's one thing I really appreciate. You know, Keith always says, the only thing that matters is people in your life that are going to get you to heaven, right? He says that all the time. If you've known him for any point in time, he always says that. How are you going to get to heaven? You know, and that's the truth. I tell a lot of high schoolers that are growing up when I'm at camp, if I'm talking to my kids, it doesn't matter if you're athletic, if you're weird, if you're a nerd, whatever, who cares, right? We don't have to have all things in common. Is that person going to get you to heaven, right? Because that's how you stop suffering. All right. So, verse 10 through 12. Somebody read for me 1 Peter 3, 10 through 12. Thank you. So here, Peter is directly quoting Psalm 34. Psalm 34 says, "Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears are toward their cry for help. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to eliminate the memory of them from earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears and rescues them from their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." Does anybody know the context of this psalm that David has written? Psalm 34. Yes. Yeah, so this was when Saul was trying to kill him, and Jonathan helped him escape, and he's hiding in the caves. And this is likely around the time he's probably in these caves, musing, or maybe later on reflecting on it. And yeah, this is when he had to act crazy around Abimelech so he wasn't murdered for being David. And he writes this psalm as a prayer because he, again, has continued to do the right thing in God's eyes over and over and over again. And here is Saul hunting him down. He's not able to be around his best friend. He's living in caves. He's moving in and out. And as he's doing this, this is in 1 Samuel 21, but in 1 Samuel 24, he's hiding out in caves, and he finds himself in a cave, in the same cave with Saul. And he has an opportunity to kill him then. And he still doesn't do it. Because it's not God's will for me to do this. And because of that, God rewards David for his continuing. So, quotes this because we're getting into suffering for doing what's right. Yeah. Saul was going to kill him. And I mean, again, in books and movies and a lot of media that we drink up, or, it's revenge stories, right? And our hero is given a motivation. And as long as they've given a motivation, we're in, right? And David had motivation, a lot of it. He gets rid of Saul, he's king now. I just think it's interesting that Peter quotes this, right? The one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from seeking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good, and he must seek peace and pursue it. I would venture to say most everybody, if not everybody in this room, has never been in the position where they're like this close to being able to just be king, and likely justified for it. But we've probably been in situations where we could end our suffering pretty easily by doing the wrong thing, by telling a lie, or getting revenge on someone, or doing something that is selfish. And that will very quickly ease maybe our worldly pain, right? Get ahead in life in some way. So, yep. Right. Yeah. And that's a good point, because in the immediate, David comes out to Saul and says, hey, I was here, and Saul was like, all right, you didn't kill me, fair enough, thank you, you can come back, and we're cool. But they weren't cool, right? Yeah, so you're right. So he gets a little bit of an immediate blessing right away, but it isn't until later that the reward is, yeah. All right. Starting in verse 13, yep. Someone read for me verse 13 through 17. 13 through 17. you. All right, so in verse 13, it says, "And who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good?" Or who is there to harm you if you're zealous for what is good? I guess that's the question, right? Who can harm you if you're zealous for what is good? Can you be harmed by that? Yeah. How? No. I agree, yeah. What do you think Peter means by this? Because you're right, but yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, this is sort of a rhetorical question, kind of, right? I mean, it's something to reflect on, but it's very much a similar path of like, if somebody who you don't have any respect for says something mean to you, it generally doesn't matter, right? Like when people say mean things like that, that can feel bad, but has there ever been a time where somebody maybe gave you criticism or maybe said something mean to you and they were either wrong and you knew they were wrong because they don't know you, or you literally do not care what they think, right? It doesn't matter. It's pretty easy to not care what they think if you don't have a whole lot of respect for that opinion, right? It's tough, but, you know, I'm sure we've been in those times where someone has said something to us and it's really affected us, and times where someone said something to you and you're like, who's that guy? I don't care. I think that's sort of the idea, right? Is they cannot harm you if you're doing good. So if their opinion of you, they might say harmful things, or they might care, but if you're doing good, if you're zealous for what is good, who cares if they think harmful things or say harmful things to you, right? Because it is inward, you know? We shouldn't dwell on that. That type of suffering is, we have all kinds of suffering in our life, but the kind of suffering that is somebody's attacking me for being a good Christian, we don't need to dwell on that because we're doing the right thing. It's the reward for serving Christ. In verse 14, "But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed." Even if. So again, we talked last week about how, you know, there wasn't ever a time where the scripture said if you be in submission for these things if you want to. But in this one, it says, even if you suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And we see this all over the Bible, right? The Beatitudes talks about those that, you know, are meek, people that suffer are humble, right? Those are the ones that are blessed. Look at Ecclesiastes. The people who, you know, it's better to be in the house of mourning, right? So if we're suffering for the sake of righteousness, we are blessed by God because of what we were talking about before, right? We've continued to stay on the right path. It says, don't fear threats. Fear can cause us to compromise our conviction. So, but sanctify Christ and the Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, but with gentleness and respect. Before that, it says, do not fear their intimidation, and do not be in dread. What does he mean by do not be in dread? Or fear of their intimidation. Yeah. 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 God will bless those who seek that right. But I was always appreciative of when Eric was teaching class, at the beginning of class would push us to continue to talk to people. Anybody talk, you're always asking, anybody talk to anybody this week? Use kind of the sales tactic of, the talk to 20 people, get 7 people to speak to you, to get your one yes, right? I heard that through sales all my life. Interesting you were bringing it up in this situation, but it's true. And I was always encouraged by that, even if I didn't always do that. I should have, but admittedly, I didn't as well as I should have. And I think because there's some intimidation, there's some dread. Oh, what if I talk to somebody and they don't want to hear about Christ, or they don't want that? It's like we're shoving the gospel down my throat, that people will say, right? And my response to that is, if I think that's what's going to get you to heaven, I should probably tell you about it, right? Yeah. That intimidation and dread is tough on all of us. We have anxiety in talking to people about Christ, and we have anxiety in our life in general. And that can make it hard on us. But in verse 15, it talks about be ready to give an answer. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, but with gentleness and respect. So when people come to question you about being a Christian, be ready to answer. But too often, I think we don't do it with that gentleness, right? I think Steve had brought up one time that somebody at his work said that they were shocked that he was so kind because he was a Christian, right? Which is an interesting thing to say because most everybody I know in this room is pretty good to me. But there is a little bit of some negativity that people have. A lot of it is like online these days, where people just, who knows what they even believe. Yeah, did somebody had their hand up over here? Yep. Yeah, and I think you're right. I definitely don't think that it means you need to like hunt people down with your opinion for sure. But having it readily available, I think is the correct outlook on it, right? Like you should be able to describe to someone why you are a Christian, right? So something that somebody taught me a long time ago was if you don't have the answer, it's okay to say, I don't have the answer, right? Yeah. Or having your guard up, right? Doesn't necessarily mean having your guard up. It's not, yeah. I do agree with that. There was a time, the first time I ever had this happen to me in my, I will never forget it. I was in high school, 15. My choir teacher is a great teacher, right? Fantastic person, helped me out with a lot of things. But he was very, very openly gay. Very open. One day, me and my friend there, who was a Mormon, funny enough, we were working on some song or whatever. And I don't know why I felt compelled to say this, but he's like, why do you two treat me so well, even though you think I'm going to hell? Said this two 15-year-olds. I don't know, like, and I was like, ugh. But the response my friend gave, actually, he said, you know what, man, like, we don't have to, I don't have to agree with your lifestyle outside of school, but I respect you as a person in this job and what we're doing right now, so why would I treat you any different? So he said he didn't back down on his belief. I didn't know what to say. I was like, what? Right? Didn't back down on his belief. Didn't look at this guy and say, yeah, dude, you're gay. You're going to hell. Like, he didn't say any of that. Didn't say any of that. He just said, that really stuck out to me. It was, hey, you're living a lifestyle that I don't agree with, but that's outside of here, man, and we don't have that relationship. You're my teacher. And that, I think, that resonated with me, being able to describe who I am is a big deal. And if you do that with gentleness, people will treat you right. That teacher never treated me any differently after that. In fact, he was actually really kind to me for the whole time, right? Yes. But you can stand firm, right, and be gentle is really the point, right? Yeah, got it. Yeah, yep, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. People sometimes we give respect even if they haven't earned it or don't deserve it. Sometimes they do have earned it or deserved it in one way, but not another. Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And I'll bring up a story that happened a long time ago. I'm sure we deal with this every single day in some ways. But I think sometimes we are talking about this from the secular standpoint. Sometimes we got to think about this from within, right? We got to be able to treat each other the same way too. Everybody in here, I'd say nearly everybody in here probably has a different opinion about something that we read in this book. It's pretty big, right? And at times, part of the reason why people have negative thoughts about us is when not because they were outside of the church and some Christian like got on them. A lot of times it's because I grew up in the church and I went to church and I did all this stuff and all anybody did was nag me about my beliefs, right? Or I would ask a question and they didn't know how to answer it. Or they would be intimidated to be here. And that intimidation, we need to be zealous for what is good and be ready, but we need to respect one another. That doesn't mean we can't tell people that they're in sin, because we can, and we should. But there is that suffering. We will only make it worse, is what I'm trying to say. We're suffering. We're here to do what's right? And if we're quarreling with one another, we're just going to make that suffering worse, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're already out here suffering in some ways. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All right. So, verse 17 through 22. For it is better if God should will it so that you suffer for doing what is right rather than doing what is wrong. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all time, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who were once disobedient, when the patience of God kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water, corresponding to that baptism now saves you. Not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and who is at the right hand of God, having gone to heaven after angels and authorities and powers have been subjected to him. So here, Peter brings up 2 people, Noah and Jesus, right? And Noah was saved by the water, 8 people saved, because they were the only 8 people that still desired God's love and put God first, or even believed in God at all, right? And God saved them. All know the story. And Jesus suffered for everyone. And now, corresponding with Noah, we are saved by baptism. And how many people want to say that that's not true is still beyond me when they read things like this. But it goes to show, like I had mentioned up before, a lot of what Peter is doing is using Christ-like examples and talking about our life and reflecting. How can we reflect Christ in our life? And I bring it back all the time, especially when it comes to baptism, is who did it? People bring up the thief on the cross and different things like that, but Jesus did it. He did the thing, right? I mean, he is God, and yet he was baptized to show us and pave the way on what we need to do now. If the only thing, that we need to do is believe in him and go get a little wet, I think that's not really a pretty fair trade-off from what he did for us, right? I mean, we got it pretty easy. All right, so next week we will continue into 1 Peter 4. Appreciate everyone's time.